Well, we give it a few more minutes for the students to join. For the students, this is the first time that I have asked everyone to log in via Zoom only and to not show up to the classroom that we're typically in at Denny Hall. So in case some of you have never used Zoom before, I'll just lay out some, I guess, ground rules or expectations on how to use Zoom. The way that this class will operate, it's just like the way that the past 7 classes have operated, and that I'll facilitate the dialogue with the guest panelists. But since we're not in the same room for you to raise your hand or signal to me that you have a question, if you have a question, please type it in the group chat. So you'll see somewhere on the toolbar that showed up on your screen where you can click chat, and then you can just message it to everyone. Or if it's a sensitive question, you can message it just to me. Or if you want it to be anonymous, you can message it just to me, and then I'll share it to the group as a question in that way. It looks like it is officially 2:31 now, so I am going to get started with today's session on graduate school. So we are really excited today to have with us 3 iSchool alumni from a few different programs who have seriously considered graduate school or pursued graduate school or are currently pursuing graduate school. I'm really, really thankful for the diversity of perspectives because in the end, I think going to graduate school is a big decision. And there's no one right or wrong answer per se, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from other people's experiences. So if we could have Andre, Colleen, and Andy do some introductions. I mean, y'all can see what I've written about you on the page, but maybe if you want to share about, I think everyone's working full-time right now. So one thing that you really like about the job that you're doing right now, and one thing that you really miss about being a student, that would be great. So Andre, could you kick us off?
Yeah, so I guess where I've come in my career at this point, this is my second full-time job as a software developer, and I think one of the best things for me has been joining a company that has a real process with how they do it. You get to work with a team, and so I feel like I've been at Microsoft for about a little over 2 years, and I've really seen my own ability to sort of it's helped me develop from kind of a college hacker who knew a lot of things, could make a lot of things, and now I feel like more of a genuine engineer who has a process, who can tackle a lot of the unknown a lot better and ship things reliably. So that's been really good. But one thing I miss from school is definitely some of the flexibility that comes with it. I feel it can be a lot easier to pursue intellectual curiosity. And another really unique thing about being at a university is there's a lot of opportunities that you get in that context that you don't really appreciate how ridiculous they are until they're no longer there. So an example I've given before is, I worked for the student communication, student paper, that kind of thing. And one thing I never did was work for the college radio station. But in retrospect, it's kind of crazy that at the time I probably could have just walked in and worked at a radio station. If I walk into a radio station now and say I'd like to work here, it doesn't usually go quite so well. So that's definitely one thing I miss about that university setting.
Great, thank you. Colleen?
Yeah, so I'm currently working as an engineering manager for a smallish company. We're about 350 people. So I almost have like the opposite perspective as Andre. I have a lot of flexibility in my day-to-day. We're solving a lot of problems, building a lot of things from scratch with the team. and we often have a lot of freedom in how we build it and what we want to do with it, which is really great. And so you can kind of get creative sometimes, and you can have a lot of, you just kind of have a lot of options on how you want to approach it. So I almost miss from college in how I had a structured environment to learn things. Generally, I mean, yeah, you got a project and you got to kind of choose and have some freedom in how you finish that project, but it was still structured around a base idea for the course or for a specific course and how you wanted to learn for that class, which I don't necessarily have as much of that here. It's like, hey, here's a really incredibly broad topic, write some software that makes it work. So that's, I think, the biggest thing I miss is having a more of a structured environment in learning new topics, new technologies, and those kinds of things.
Andy?
Yep. So my name is Andy Herman. I'm currently working as a risk program manager over at Microsoft. As you can see, my little bio here is probably surprising to many. Yes, I graduated with a degree in microbiology, and I was actually in med school for a couple of years prior to going back to school for a master's in information management. I think for me, the thing that I love about my job and the things that I do is just the constant challenges and the constant change that we as a security org here kind of see on a day in and day out basis. I like to be constantly busy and constantly challenged, so it's a good fit for me. One thing that I miss about school and being part of this experience is, for somebody that had a non-traditional background and then entering this graduate school, for me, it was great to be able to explore and be in what I consider more of a sandbox environment to test different subjects and different curiosities. Then that flexibility is something that I miss. I know I still do a lot more of, but I think it's a little bit easier to do when you're still a student at school.
Andy, if you could check your AV, I heard a bit of like a buzz when you were speaking. It was a little strange, but we'll give it some time to get sorted out. So just as a clarification for the students that are on the call, the Master of Science in Information Management program is one of the graduate programs that the Information School at UW houses. There are two other graduate programs that the Information School houses. One is the Master of Library and Information Science program, the MLIS program, and then the PhD in Information Science. So the iSchool currently is composed of 4 programs. You are in one of them, 2 are master's programs, and then 1 is a PhD program. Of course, these are not the only graduate programs that you should consider, but I did receive some questions from the students about different programs at the iSchool. In case that helps clarify the situation. So to get us started in the conversations, these are questions that the students submitted. I thought these were good broad questions that perhaps many of the panelists have thought through as you considered your decision to pursue or not pursue graduate school. So would love to hear your thoughts on maybe the first few questions of what motivated you to pursue or not pursue graduate school, and what are the pros and cons that you kind of thought about or weighed as you made that decision?
I can go ahead and start, I suppose. Actually, do any of the other participants want to start?
Oh, you can go for it, man.
Okay. I suppose graduate school was not something that I thought about particularly serious at the time of graduation. I was very anxious to get out of an academic setting at the time and sort of make it out in the outside of an academic community. But one thing that always kind of stuck with me after that was, well, I suppose actually what happened more was that I established myself in an industry, and there was a lot of room for growth. And as you grow, there's always room to grow more and to take it in different directions or to advance at a company or whatever it is. But you start to consider the amount of time and effort and work that it's going to take to continue to do that and to continue to develop and have new opportunities. And you start to say, okay, so if we took that, could that be applied to completely different challenges, or just sort of can I continue on the current road, or should I consider a different one? And for me, a huge part of why I studied informatics and got into technology and stuff was a very strong belief about the capabilities of technology to solve big society level problems. And so one thing I found with my time in industry was that I didn't actually spend that much time working on those sorts of things. And so I started to consider, how could I reposition myself to be able to take on sort of bigger problems and also more human problems. And one thing, I don't know how many of you noticed, but the degree that I was looking at was data science. And there are different paths for a data scientist, and many of them are not that different from a programmer. But to me, that was a really sort of safe way to continue forward on the path that I was on, while also kind of getting one leg out onto different paths. So it was more clear to me that I could take that sort of credential and move it into nonprofits or activism, data journalism, right? Some of my other interests that I felt were not necessarily I wasn't super well positioned to work on now that I was in the technology industry. I felt like I would have a way to bring those options, make them open to me without having to just immediately jump in with both feet. So it was sort of a branching rather than like a complete jump into an entirely new world. And so that was a lot of what motivated my decision to pursue this.
Cool. I'm assuming you're done, and I'm happy to jump in now. I did not go to grad school, as it listed on the other one. I did consider it strongly. I took the GRE. I started looking at applications and at school programs that I could go to. For me, when I was going into my senior year in the informatics program, you start applying to jobs if you want to go into full-time in like September, October. You're like barely in week 1 and you're already going to interviews. And it was a little scary. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I still had a whole year of school left and a lot of classes to take and a lot of time to figure it out, but not a lot of time to figure it out before I had a job offer in hand. And so that was like my main drawing factor towards grad school. Was it essentially gave me a way to have a couple more years to explore as to what I wanted to do and to think about what I wanted to do. I ended up, for a little bit more context, I have an older sister. I'm the younger one. My older sister worked all the way through her PhD and just graduated this past summer with her PhD from the University of Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, she was in school for 13 years though.
Wow.
So, she did a fabulous job, and she really, she worked really, really hard, and she did a lot of good stuff with it. But being the younger sibling, she was already in her master's program by the time I was considering full-time positions. So I also had somebody to look to who already went into a master's program and was going down that path. And I could kind of see what it looked like compared to this path of going for a full-time job. And then once I had gotten through the work of getting, going to interviewing, and I was working on some of my grad school applications and kind of trying to make that choice, I realized that for me, I would rather go into a full-time job and take that time to explore and see if I like it, and then go back to grad school if I didn't like it or if there's something more I wanted to learn, and decided to take the full-time offer instead.
And I'll just add a little quick comment on kind of why I decided to pursue grad school. Mine is a little bit different from the rest of the panel here. For me, I wanted to learn a new field, completely different from what my original trade was in. It was a good opportunity for me to explore. My original intention was not to pursue a career in information management nor security. It was rather curiosity around what security was and how I can integrate it into healthcare. So the goal was to go back to med school, but following grad school, I just determined that it was a new passion for me, and I wanted to pursue a career in security. So that, you know, it was a stemmed from an interest and then ended up being a career.
Awesome. I love that there are three very different perspectives represented here, and that's exactly why I jumped on all of your willingness to provide your perspectives here. I'm going to pause here just to see if there's anyone from the class who have questions of things that they want to hear more about based on what we've heard from the three alumni so far. As the class knows, I am very comfortable with silence. So I'm going to give it at least 30 seconds for you to struggle your way to the chat function of Zoom. And if there aren't any questions, then we can proceed with some of the other questions that are on this slide. So if the panelists want to start thinking of what other question on this slide that you want to share about, we can go anywhere. We don't have to cover all the questions. We don't have to go them in order. But the questions that you feel like you have a strong thoughts or opinions on is where we can start. So for that, it looks like there aren't any questions so far. So if Andy, you have any questions on this slide that you want to provide some perspectives on, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you just look at the second to last question, is it okay to not go to grad school, and what are the benefits of grad school? You know, I commonly interact with recruits to Microsoft when we're doing interview loops, and not everybody has graduate degrees. They don't all have master's degrees. And as Colleen was mentioning earlier, you know, if your resume and your passions align with the job that doesn't require you to go through grad school, I don't think it's necessarily something that you have to go to. There are benefits for grad school, from my opinion, if you are looking to make a drastic or to some degree changes in what your trade is into some new avenue. I think grad school, not just on paper, but just the things that you learn from the school and the program, gives you additional opportunities, additional years of school to learn from the professors and the folks on the campus to help you kind of develop those muscles. So it's definitely a benefit to go. Is it a necessity? I don't think so. And if you don't end up going to grad school, are you behind the eight ball? You're not. I honestly, I've seen, you know, people far more successful that maybe don't even have a bachelor's degree, right? So I think degree and what you ultimately end up with is very minute compared to what you know and what you're passionate about. If you want to learn more, go to grad school and expand your horizons. But if you're confident in what you know, pursue a career in that, and then it's never too late. You can come back as a mid-career and pursue additional learnings, especially in something like security, where the field is changing almost every other day. It may be beneficial for you later on to see what are the new trends, what are the new things that I need to keep up on to attend grad school at that later time.
Yeah. So for the info students, just to clarify, when we look at the data of what informatics graduates choose to do after they finish their Bachelor of Science degree, most of them do not go to graduate school right away. In fact, I think like 97% or something like that get a job right away. That doesn't mean that they don't want to go back to school. It just means they don't do it right away, right? And a lot of the questions that were asked by the students was about like, oh, like, is grad school really necessary? Or like, how much does your pay go up if you have a master's degree versus you don't, right? And I can show you where on the iSchool website that information is, that those statistical information is available. I can send the link to that via Canvas afterwards if you want to know, but you know, it's not that substantial. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of info grads don't pursue graduate school right away. Like monetary reasons is really not a reason that people pursue it. The info students I've spoken to, if they pursue graduate school right away, it's mostly because they have a very particular research interest that they love and want to devote all of their waking hours to. And they feel like a graduate study, like a PhD program, is the best way to channel that instead of doing it in a workplace. So monetary reasons really are far from reasons why info grads, I think, go into it at least right away.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump in there a little bit too. I know this isn't talked about a lot when you're in your bachelor's degree, but there's a lot of large companies like Microsoft, for example, that will actually pay for your master's degree. So sometimes, especially if finances are tight and you're like, I don't really know if I want to go to grad school, like if that is a financial decision for you, sometimes going and working for a larger company full-time can actually pay for your master's degree. And then
Great
you
point.
can still get it too.
Great point. Yes.
So it's usually a larger company thing. Like I'm at a small company, we will pay for individual classes, but we will not pay for full-time graduate degrees.
Yep.
But we do one-off classes. I do have a number of employees who will go and take a class here or there at the university or at a community college if they want to continue their education.
Yep. It looks like we got our first question in the group chat, and it's for Andre. The question is about Andre's experience and grad school opening up more opportunities. Is it possible to make larger social impacts without going to grad school first? Or do informatics students who just have a bachelor's degree generally end up at large tech companies? Oh, you're on mute.
Hello.
Yay.
So no, I don't think that it is necessary to go to grad school to get to that sort of work. I think that so there's a couple things that go into my consideration here, at least from a personal perspective. And one is that at this point, so I think that software development and data science are both very powerful tool sets. But at this point, I'm a pretty well-established and confident software engineer. And so there's not that much more for me to gain. I mean, there's always the work of just repositioning your career, which I could do by dropping in an application at a different place. And there are absolutely software development positions at the sort of places that I would be able to do that sort of work. But I think it's more that by acquiring a second very powerful credential and tool set, that's going to allow me to be a little bit more assertive in terms of like, you know, this is exactly where I want to be and the sort of work that I'm doing. In fact, to just be a data scientist, I could probably just start doing that at Microsoft. I mean, I don't know how much that applies to the whole industry, but I know a ton of people at Microsoft who are not academically credentialed data scientists who basically manage to get into that position and learn the skills. Microsoft is one of those companies that will pay for a master's degree. So sometimes they get the job as a data scientist while also pursuing the degree. So, you know, for me, this was, and one thing I also would like to add to my experience, because I don't think it's entirely clear based on what I've said so far, but I'm doing a kind of non-traditional approach to graduate school, which is that so first of all, the program that I'm going to take is online. It's a fully online degree. And the other thing about it is I'm not actually enrolled in it yet because the application isn't open, but I'm enrolled in a smaller program that's called a MicroMasters, where essentially the classes that I take are the first 4 classes or so in that degree program and will count as credit towards it. And so a huge part of what I've decided to do is like, it's a very sort of in-place upgrade for me where I can continue my current career and my current life. But I started taking these classes because they were interesting to me and because I could kind of envision myself making some of these transitions. And you take your first 1 or 2 introduction classes and it's kind of, it confirms that you're interested in it. But at a certain point, it was like, the only way for me to keep going forward is to start to go towards something like graduate school, because I've already taken the intro to data science class like twice. Um, so, uh, so, in that way, it's my approach to this has actually been very kind of conservative in that, I haven't I think that you can take different approaches, right? You can kind of say, either I'm going to do this for a very sharp change because I want a big change, or you can take an approach like mine, which is like maybe stretched out over more time and doesn't require as much upfront commitment. I could, at the end of this MicroMasters, decide that it's not for me and not go for the full master's degree at that point. So that's been informing a lot of why I've chosen this particular approach. But I mean, to get back to the original question, like there's no reason you can't just get a job at that major nonprofit or whatever it is that you want to be doing. Like there's almost always a way to do that. And if it's something where you really need a graduate degree, they're usually pretty clear about that. It's just like, no, you need the graduate degree. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time wondering if you need one. Like I think you'll generally know.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of the fields that informatics graduates go into, the default is that the employers don't have a baseline expectation for you to have a graduate degree. There are a few that having a graduate degree, I think, is looked particularly favorably upon. And I would say data science is one of them, right? UX a little bit, or product management a little bit, but like software engineering, not so much, like IT consulting, not so much, business analyst, not so much, data analyst, not so much, security, maybe, but like you can definitely break into security without a master's degree as well, but maybe Andy has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, I think for security, I don't think I've seen very many people with like a master's in security specifically.
Mm-hmm.
On the contrary, the more advanced positions in security actually prefer certificates, professional certs,
Yep.
in favor of a master's degree. So, like a CISSP would rank higher, more favorably than somebody that even like a PhD student. If we had 2 candidates where one was a CISSP and the other was a PhD, I think the inclination would be to lean towards somebody who has a certificate in security.
Got it. Yeah, certificates is also a great point. That's a credential that sometimes employers look for depending on what field you're interested in. And I guess what Andy just said reminds me of like the times that it might hurt you actually to have a graduate degree versus helping you. And I would say those are, those are unfortunate situations, but some employers would not look favorably upon a graduate degree if it just means you're like overqualified for something that they're not requiring, right? So what that means is like a lot of HR teams, if they know that you have a master's degree or PhD degree, they know that on paper they should be paying you more. But if they're used to working with folks without those degrees, then they have a budget of, how much this role should pay. And that might introduce more complications to the scenario than really needed per se.
So I actually have a few thoughts on that as
Yeah.
well, which is that, we lump a lot of this into graduate degree, but I think that there are some really, really important differences between most master's degrees and most PhDs, and also just sort of the professional graduate degree. It kind of comes down to professional versus academic, and generally a master's degree is a much more professional degree. PhDs are very academic, and this is another part of why I'm specifically choosing data science, because again, it's sort of in that middle zone. There are a lot of corporate data science jobs, but I also think that like if I ever were to pursue a PhD, which is something I'm interested in doing someday, having like a solid foundation in data science, I think would set me up to do, you know, slightly more hardcore quantitative research, which is a little bit more where I want to be. And so, you know, I think it's important to not think just about the sort of level of degree you want, but also the sort of quality of the degree you want. You know, my perspective is that most people, PhDs are a much narrower sort of path that most people kind of going to college, most people that I meet are going to college for a professional career. And so a PhD is a little bit different than that. And so I think that you need to be more intentional and more thoughtful about why you would want to get a PhD or any sort of academic degree. Whereas a professional degree, like most master's degrees, you can think of that much more as like, oh, this would just be something that was kind of good for my career or might be good for my career.
I would kind of add to that and say, like, the further you go up in degrees is almost like a narrowing of the funnel. When you first come into college, you've got about 1 billion things you can learn and you can do, and you kind of choose a program to help direct you in one direction. And, you know, choosing informatics, there's a whole bunch of different careers, different other programs you can go to coming out of that. And then going into your master's degree is kind of another way to kind of direct for your career path, but also narrowing that funnel for you. Like, do you want like a slight redirection? Maybe you got a technical undergraduate degree, but you're much more interested in creating startups. So maybe now you get a business master's degree so that you have a business side and a technical side and can do a startup of your own or something like that. It's kind of narrowing the funnel. And then the PhD is like turning that funnel into this teeny tiny little straw where you're focusing on like a really tiny point and you're focusing really, really hard on it. So like you're really, and that's where the academic side comes in, because you usually have like one topic and you're researching and you're focusing on that for the course of your PhD. That topic might apply to a job. There's like, especially in more of the hard science PhDs, a lot of them end up going into data science jobs afterwards if they don't stay in academia, because they know a lot about how to research and handle that data and analyze that data and come up with findings from that specific type of data. And if there are jobs in, you know, in companies that aren't academic related to that data, then they're perfectly fit for doing exactly that job. So that's a popular track, but it kind of depends on whether you know exactly like where you're trying to narrow that funnel to.
Yeah. We have about 15 minutes left together. So I want to just do a pulse check of the class. If anyone has a question that they would like the panelists to answer, you can use this time to type that in. I've switched the slide now to another set of questions. If anyone has a strong opinion on which one you would like to hear the answer to, you're welcome to note that in the chat as well, so we know how to prioritize. But I think some common threads that I've heard so far is grad school is a big investment of your time and or money. It also means that you have to narrow down your focus further, and the more advanced degree that it becomes, I think the more narrow that focus becomes. There's also a difference between professional degrees and academic degrees. So a lot of the degrees that actually not necessarily, but yeah, there's a difference between a master's degree and a PhD. And that's where some of the questions on this page, I think the answers would differ. So for a PhD, having research experience would be greatly advantageous. For a professional degree, not so much. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but it wouldn't necessarily be expected of you per se. How long can graduate school last? PhDs tend to be a lot longer than master's degrees. So a lot of master's degrees can be as short as 1 year to 1, 2, or 3 years is usually most common for the kind of disciplines that a lot of info grads pursue. PhDs tend to be between 4 to 7, 8, 12 years. And a lot of it just varies on a lot of variables that sometimes are not necessarily in your control. Funding your graduate school education, a lot of PhD programs, the school will fund you because you're doing important research that is valuable to the organization. Many master's programs are fee paying, but as some of the panelists have pointed out, many employers will co-fund or fully fund your master's degree. So those are other options to consider when it comes to funding. It looks like we got a question in the chat, and this is a question for Andy. How did a master's in information management prepare you for a career as a program manager? Do you have an opinion for whether MSIM or master's in business will be more valuable for this career field?
Hey, yeah, so for program management, I don't think a specific master's degree will help you be a good or bad program manager. I think program management as a study and as a field involves more communication skills and building soft skills. Rather, it's what program that you are managing as a program manager. I think that piece is what I learned from my master's degree. I think that'll be the same if you want to go for an MBA. Your focus would be more on being a program manager for business problems, whereas for me, because of my specialization in security, I'm able to drive programs and help teams understand, how to complete programs and how to idealize and strategize programs with a focus in security. So, either or. Absolutely, this is not to say that program management is not a specialty in its own. I think it doesn't. Most graduate programs, if you have the will, you can definitely take classes on program management, but the focus should be more. My humble opinion is specializing on a specific topic for you to be a program manager in. There are general program managers that are thrown into kind of here is a business function that we need program managers for. But at the end of the day, pursue the graduate school's focus should be to pursue something that you're passionate about. If that happens to be in program management in and of itself, the MSIM or even Foster's will provide the knowledge to help you become a really good program manager. But if your specialization is, hey, I really want to be a really good UX designer and use my UX skills as a program manager, apply for, learning more in a graduate program that focuses on, human-centered design and engineering. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you're shopping for grad programs.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to add just a little bit to that as well, which is that one thing that I think should always be something to consider as you continue your academic development is that you should become more individually and internally driven as you go. I think the higher you go, especially if you're talking about, getting a PhD or even going farther than that, right? Eventually, it's like you're really the driver of your research. But there is a huge world between an undergraduate degree and a master's degree, and you don't have to jump right into it. So, I would really, really caution people against making sort of snap decisions or arbitrary, like, I should go to grad school and I found a program and maybe that's a good one. And now I'm in it for a couple years and a lot of money. And really say, by the time you're getting into grad school, it should be because you're reaching the limits of what you've been able to do in sort of your current situation, either because you don't know enough or you need some really good mentors from people with more experience than you. But if you can't get yourself to read a couple of books or take a couple of, cheap online classes or whatever it is, right? Then maybe, you have to think if going all the way into a graduate program is, if you're really there yet. So I think that one thing we should all hope to take away from an undergraduate education, 4 years at a university, is that we are developing some self-confidence in our ability to teach ourselves. And so, I think it's the wrong decision to go to grad school because you're not confident that you can teach yourself. There's still great reasons to go, but I think some of it should start with your own drive.
There any other questions from the students in the room? If not, I think as we approach the last 9 minutes of our time together, I'll ask the panelists to start thinking about concluding words or final words of advice or things that you think are relevant to this discussion that just haven't come up yet. And if you have anything along those realms, you're welcome to share those with us now.
Yeah, my kind of like final statement is, if you're going into the technical world and you are, going into any sort of job in tech, it is quite flexible. Some of the companies have very specific guidelines around who they want for a type of role, but there's so many different companies, so many different sizes, different varieties, different goals of what they're trying to do, and so many different roles that you can do within this world of tech, that it is quite flexible. There is no one way of like, this is the background you have to have. You don't have to be, I got a master's degree or a bachelor's degree in this, master's degree in that, and I had 5 years of experience in this type of role to get a job. Like, that's not true. I've worked with fantastic software engineers that didn't even have high school degrees. I've worked with fantastic software engineers who had masters and PhDs in completely unrelated fields in like finance and whatever that has nothing to do with what we're doing. You get a lot of variety. The key thing is kind of, as Andre said, like knowing what you're wanting to do, driving for it, and a lot of potentially self-education if you didn't get taught formally how to do that. But you will notice as you look at job descriptions at companies, a lot of them will say, they'll ask for like, either this type of master's degree or an equivalent 5 years of experience. Like, a lot of them don't care one way or another. They tend to be very flexible as long as you can prove you know what you're talking about.
Any final words or questions from people online?
I'll just throw out, a lot of the times when I do these panels, I get asked about this, but I try to have a pretty open inbox. So if you want to, if anyone thinks of questions or whatever, feel free to share my email, and I just want people to feel welcome to continue the conversation.
Yep. Thank you. Well, okay, I got a question in the chat. It says, can you pursue 2 master's degrees at the same time in different fields?
I've heard of it.
Go for it.
A lot of things if you really want to. I think it's usually not recommended though, but you can definitely do it.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, there are special programs at different universities that combine fields. For example, like I think the Huntsman program at the University of Pennsylvania combines their business program with their technology program, so you get both. But it, and Stanford has a similar one that combines technology with like public policy, et cetera, et cetera. So programs exist for it. I think, and this comes down to that question about like motivation and even like what makes a strong application. For graduate school, your motivation is very important. Your purpose your statement of purpose is what's typically called in the application materials. Essentially, like why are you interested in pursuing this program with us is it gets a lot of weight. And I know that undergraduate application process also has that, but for graduate school, they will really, really, really look at that on top of your transcript or your references or your previous background. So I think if you have like a vision for X, and that you feel like the best way to get to that X is through 2 programs, then I think it makes a compelling application. But if your vision is for X and it could be accomplished with 1 degree, that's probably what the admissions folks are going to be asking too. So I say that having worked as a admissions person for the info program for other colleges, et cetera, that the motivation and purpose and clarity in articulating that is something that people do look for in that process.
And to add to that, I think as you could tell, I think all of the panelists here kind of gave the same reaction. But at the end of the day, when you apply for a job, and if you're thinking that having 2 master's degrees is going to impress, I don't think it does one way or another. It's really, you can have as many master's and bachelor's degrees as you want, but at the end of the day, when you're in an interview, we want to know, what can you contribute? How do you fit into the role? Not, what's your GPA? What classes did you take? So, I think at a certain point in your career, going down to what did you score in English 131 is less and less important. It's more, what type of a rounded candidate are you and how can you contribute to the team that becomes a higher focus.
Yeah. Also, no one asked you, I think Andy was kidding, but no one asked you what you got in that class.
Yeah.
No one asked you even what your GPA or your CAP is.
Nobody looks at that. Yeah.
No one asked you what did you get on your GRE or what did you get on your SAT or your ACT. No one asked you.
Yeah, I don't think you send transcripts in with job applications. So.
No. Few employers will ask for it in the final step just to make sure you're not like lying. But that's not even standard practice anymore.
Generally, don't only ask for a transcript if it was a job requirement. If you had to have a specific degree, they'll ask for a transcript.
Yep. We did get a question in the chat, and that'll probably be our last question for the day. How does the structure of grad school compare to that of undergrad?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. It's definitely, I think it'll vary by grad school. So I can only speak to my experiences at the iSchool. Grad school it's a lot more self-driven. So there's very little hand-holding in terms of expectations in class. So, there's no quiz sections and where they'll do pop quizzes or any of that nature. It's the teachers treat you as professionals and you're expected to treat each other as professionals. So from that perspective, it's a little bit more independent in terms of you need to have that self-drive to learn and that desire to learn. But it will be very different from undergrad, because I think in undergrad, you are driven by how am I going to perform on this next quiz, on this next homework. But rather in grad school, it's a more holistic approach of saying, hey, we know you're capable, we know you're smart. We want you to, kind of learn more and dig deeper into this topic. So, we'll treat you with the expectation that you're a professional. So there's a lot more reading, a lot more discussions, but again, probably different for every grad school and every program, but at least for my experiences directly with the MSIM program, it was, a lot more independent and dependent on yourself.
Well, we are 1 minute away from the end of the class. So I just want to give a virtual round of applause for Colleen, Andy, and Andre for taking an hour of your workdays to share your experiences with us. Students, you know the drill for next week. I think next week's conversation topic is career stuff. So the only speaker for that will be the iSchool's former career advisor, which is me. And actually, I might invite the current iSchool career advisor, who's pretty new to the role, to come to that session as well, if she's available, so that she could provide more perspectives and continuity in the conversation. But yeah, submit the questions, keep them coming, and I will cater next week's session based on what y'all want to hear. Thank you all for your time and have a great weekend.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having us.
Bye.
Bye.